Hi everyone. Thanks for coming out. It's a rather chilly night. It's certainly the weather has turned, so I'm glad I brought my scarf. That's nice. Over the next few days, I'm going to get a chance to talk to a few different groups. Tomorrow morning, I'll talk to the youth leaders. I'm going to talk to them about what a lifelong ministry might look like and how to deal with the disappointments that inevitably prevent many of us from having a lifelong ministry and how to navigate some of that. I'm going to talk with the guys about how everything I've ever needed to know about the Christian life I learned from cooking brisket on my barbecue, because I love American low and slow barbecue. I'm going to talk to the ladies about identity and where it is we learn about who we are and why that sometimes sets us off to have all kinds of bruises that get pressed on in life and make life difficult. And then on Sunday morning, I'm looking forward to sharing a really marvellous story that comes from the chapter of my ministry journey of being a pastor for 15 years in West Auckland, and a chain of evangelistic events where we saw over 40 people baptised in a chain of events that starts in the most innocuous kind of way and ends in a very meaningful and powerful story. And I won't tell you too much more. Suffice to say, please invite people to come along on Sunday morning to hear that. Tonight, I want to start the journey of my time with you by looking at really the third part of your vision, in a sense. So many churches would say something very similar, wouldn't they? I mean, I was writing a little blurb for my talk at Promise Keepers this year, which is around connection and community. And I started that blurb by saying many churches would have a vision statement that would say something along the lines of knowing God and making him known, right? They're not too dissimilar from this idea of loving God, loving others. And then this third troublesome piece of the equation, making disciples. This rather curious and difficult thing to do. It's kind of like being asked to walk on water, isn't it? To make disciples. How does one do it? Well, tonight, hopefully, we'll learn some lessons about how it is that we can work with others in a world that has changed, in a world where the things that we used to do don't make as much sense. Used to be in church life that discipleship was about a guy up the front, usually a guy sadly, who would tell people what the truth was, right? We have a very telling mode of discipleship. We also assumed that people who came together in the church on Sunday, they were being discipled and we were doing it as a group. Everybody was hearing the same thing, everybody was being discipled at the same time. And that had become our primary mode of discipleship for several hundred years, in fact. This device here has a lot to answer for, because this device here means that no longer, particularly generations maybe a little younger than the ones represented in this room, no longer believe that the guy up the front is much of an expert. And they now believe that they can find out anything they need to know at the click of a button. So they are now the expert. And so discipleship has gotten that much more difficult, because now our most comfortable mode of discipleship, telling, proclamation, is no longer working the way it once did. Because it requires the listener to believe the speaker is an expert. And thanks to our device, everybody's an expert now. So we're going to talk about discipleship in this kind of new period of the church that we find ourselves. I wouldn't claim to be a great expert on discipleship. Certainly I was more comfortable with evangelism. That was the primary ministry that I started off 23 years ago this month it was. It was June 7, 1998 was when I got saved, and within 6 months I was travelling around the country sharing my testimony as this radio announcer who'd gotten saved and had this remarkable story, which the men will hear a little bit about tomorrow night. I was good at evangelism. In fact, when we planted the church, we really wanted to do this experiment, which we'll hear about on Sunday, about putting evangelism in the hands of the church community. And over the course of the 15 years that we led the church, 117 new believers were baptised. The majority of those in the first 10 years. For a long time there, we averaged a new believer every month that we baptised. And we never had evangelistic events. which is ironic because I was an evangelist who was, a preaching evangelist, but we were trying to work out, could we convince people to actually share their faith? Discipleship wasn't so easy in our group, and yet when we finally did come to the end of our 15 years, we looked back and we saw something that we didn't expect to see, that was a pleasant surprise. And that was that of the people who'd been part of our church community, over 30 of them had gone into full-time Christian work for the very first time since becoming part of our group. And we realised that maybe we knew a little bit about discipleship. We had seen people do a certain kind of discipleship anyway. Whoops, click. Right, so we know that's the mandate, that we're to go forth and make disciples, but that's become a challenge. You don't have to be in church leadership for very long to realise that people don't seem to change a lot, do they? They don't tend to grow a great deal, truthfully. That's the reality. We often are disappointed that people a few years on don't seem greatly different from when we first encountered them. If you're a pastor for any length of time, you realise that there are some people you are pretty sure could come to church for 1,000,000 years and not be any different from the day you met them. We're going to try and find out why. Why is it that some people don't seem to change at all, and yet every so often God throws us a bone and we meet someone whose life gets turned upside down and they are revolutionised by the gospel and their world changes so profoundly, their whole person changes. Why did they change? Now obviously part of that which we'll take as a given tonight is that God is the great discipler. You and I are merely under shepherds to the great shepherd, trying to help the sheep find something good to eat and to grow. But we don't want to just leave it with God, because after all, if it was just God's job, he wouldn't have told us to make disciples. You and I have a job to do. And the challenge tonight will be to work out how we're doing. First port of call in terms of our job as leaders is to do a bit of self-reflection before we consider the journey. I read this verse, I was kind of intrigued by it, because I thought, here's this exhortation, go with the strength you have, I'm sending you. So we know that as leaders there's a sense that God is sending us. But I wonder how much strength you have. How much strength do you have? Go with the strength you have. I realise that's a really interesting question. I wonder what the answer is. How strong are you? Do you have much to give right about now? Or is the tank running low? When was the last time you personally grew in a significant way? That you became stronger, that I became stronger. The temptation as a leader is to think that discipleship is something that other people are engaged in, but that we are the discipler. Because everybody in this room is to be a disciple, right? And I wonder what a challenging thought that is. When was the last time you really, truly grew in an area of your faith, of your life? Not necessarily learnt more, because Mr. Google can take care of the learning part. That's not the kind of growth I'm talking about. The kind of change that leads other people to comment. I knew that some profound change had occurred in my life when I heard my wife say to a friend on the phone one day, I'm still getting used to the new Aaron. Oh, I had grown. I had changed. The things that had been a great concern to her about the way in which I reacted to life and dealt with life was suddenly changing. So before we worry about other people, let's start by doing a bit of reflection on ourselves. After all, we cannot take people where we have not gone ourselves, and we cannot ask people to go where we are not currently going. So that's a good challenge, isn't it? So I want to start with that, because I want that to kind of germinate inside of us tonight. Because ultimately, in the world that doesn't need us to tell them things anymore, what they need is for us to show them things. And if we focus on showing discipleship, that's going to be a great starting point for the journey, right? So that's the first challenge. today I'm going to use as a working illustration something that I wish I didn't have to use, because I wish that in talking about my journey of change when it comes to getting in control of my weight and my health, that I was further along in that journey. I've made some progress, you'll see today, but by no means have I finished. If you spotted me at dinner, you saw me eat some bizarre aberration of a hamburger, devoid of buns, and all in an attempt to follow this kind of strict eating guide, and then foolishly sat in front of a plate of chocolate brownies that seemingly are the object of the world's smallest kind of slicing exercise. But I was grateful that I resisted. I want to look at the weight loss journey as a nice example of change, because there's all different kinds of change. Discipleship's really just about change, but change in a way that's informed by the gospel, that's heading towards something. So, here's me at the beginning of the journey, before I hit this next button. This is weigh-in night in 2017. So let me give you the background. We had moved to Sydney. I had taken up a new role that wouldn't work out for me, unfortunately, at a Christian radio station in Sydney. You can hear that story if you're a youth leader tomorrow morning. But while we were in Sydney, we were prone to getting lost a lot. And Debbie got lost one afternoon and just pulled over to the side of the road and thought, I have to ask for directions. Well, she found this lady wearing a big puffer jacket, and on the back it said, "Weight loss coaching works, ask me how." And she just walked out of the gym, and Debbie said, "Look, I don't even know what suburb am I in? How do I get back to Castle Hill where we live?" And this lady said, and tell me about this weight loss coaching works business. Turned out the lady was a Christian lady she had trained many years ago at the Christian City Church C3 Bible College in Sydney, and she and her husband were now coaches in this kind of weight loss program, and they had lost a lot of weight, and they invited us to this meeting to learn more. I very reluctantly went along to this meeting. I was, as you can see there, not a happy camper. I was at my all-time largest, tipping the scales at 121 kilos and heading in the wrong direction. And feeling like this was a part of my life that was now out of control and that I tried everything. Well, on the upside, because I tried everything, I was willing to hear about one more thing. I didn't like the meeting. Man, did they tell stories? 2 hours of stories. We get it. You lost weight. We get it. You used to be fat. We get it already. And I was getting quite frustrated with all of this. And then they were, the sales pitch. Turned out my radar had gone off. It was like, this is some kind of Amway scheme. It was Amway. The Amway portion was the vitamins, was the bit that they wanted to sell. But to their credit, they never really forced that greatly, but that was the part of it. Anyway, they had this scheme. They appealed to the Scottish blood running through my veins, where they said, here's the price for one of you to join, but if the hubby wants to join, it's just $50 for him, a $50 guy. I'm like, well, for $50, for $50, I could have a go. So we turn up on the night, and they have this weigh-in, and they film you, and they ask you some questions. And so this little video, I think, has me weigh-in night, and then 10 weeks later, and then we'll talk a bit about the journey. I'm Aaron. I'm 44 from Castle Hill. I weigh 121 kilos, but unbelievably, my age is 80. My 10-week goal is to lose 12 kilos, and I'm doing this transformation.
So here we are, 10 weeks later, and your goal is to lose 12 kilos. How much have you lost? 12.4. Yay!
All right, so I hate that photo. I hate that I'm lighter now than I was in that video. I reckon I look better. It's because I'm younger in that video. That's the thing. Right. Oh, that's ugly. But there you go. That's the sorts of things they make you do. Take your shirt off. So that was just 12 kilos in the first 10 weeks. And in the end, I'd lose 20 kilos. Oops. Go back. There we go. You can stay on there for a little while. Actually, no, that's terrible. Who would make anybody do that? There we go. All right, let's just. Actually, it was really a challenging time to lose that weight, and I've bounced back a little. I've picked up 5 or 6 of the kilos, which, as it made me, confirm to me, as I suspected, it was Auckland that was making me fat. So we moved back to Auckland, and I found a few kilos. So the battle continues, but I'm a bit better further on than I was when you first saw it. I want to take a look at a model of change, of motivation, that comes from a psychologist named Daniel Pink. And Pink looks at what does it mean for motivation to change, to move from the external to the internal. I want to suggest that here's the challenge of church life. The challenge of church life is that we often leverage external motivation too much. We leverage it on a Sunday by having talks that are inspiring and motivational, which is great. Maybe even last as long as till Monday. But then you'll need another motivational talk. I used to have a friend, well, still my friend, who's a sales manager, and he said to me, Aaron, he said, to be fair, what you've said on Sunday has been undone by the sales team meeting on Monday morning. A new kind of message, External motivation is this kind of idea that I only do stuff because I'm being propped up by things outside of me. Whether it's a bit of motivation, whether it's we suggest that somehow God would be disappointed in you, that there might be some negative consequence coming your way, might be the lure of blessing if you did the right thing. Reward and punishment is the world of external motivators. And external motivators are good for short bursts of energy, but they are not sustainable. And when you and I are thinking about the groups that we are part of and the people that we are working with, the question is, how often do I get the feeling that things only happen with this person if I stick to them like glue, if I'm putting air in their tires the whole time, if I'm texting them every other minute, if I'm always in contact? And it feels like discipleship, but I want to suggest to you, actually, you might be preventing discipleship. Because if the person remains dependent on you, that maybe they haven't actually become a disciple yet. And the test is, if you take your hands off the person, take your hands off that situation, what happens? Does the person stop coming to church if you don't ring them every Saturday and say, "You coming to church tomorrow?" What happens? We want to move from the external to the internal. And this is why I look at this model. The model is... it has 3 elements to it. Autonomy or ownership is a key part of change that's often assumed in church environments. We assume that people who are sitting here on a Sunday have signed on for being discipled, have actually engaged and owned that process of change. In reality, people come to church for all kinds of reasons. And I want to suggest to you the person who changes a lot usually changes because they are owning this journey of discipleship. They are saying, I'm in and this is what I want. So it was interesting. When I had that first weigh-in night, they asked me this question. This is a good ownership autonomy question. They said, Aaron, out of 10, 10 being you are fully committed to this weight loss journey, and 0, you're not at all committed, where would you see yourself right now? I said, I see myself as an 8. They said, that's good. And this is what they said next. If you had been any less than an 8, we would not let you start. Wow. You wouldn't let me start until I was an 8. See, they understood that if I didn't personally own this journey, if I could only do the diet as long as people were propping me up and encouraging me and exhorting me, that would be unsustainable. They had this machine that you pulled on the weigh-in night that told you how old your body was. Did you hear my answer? The machine said I was 80. My 8 firmed at that moment. I suddenly was really into that commitment because it's like, 80, you are kidding me. At the 10-week weigh-in when I had lost 12 kilos, my age had fallen to 74 and I was a bit disappointed. And the lady said, yeah, the machine only goes up to 80. So in truth, I was possibly a lot older. Autonomy is a key element in discipleship. that you and I have got to start asking people, are you doing this because you choose it? Because you want it? And so you could use that scaling question in a discipleship conversation. If someone says, I really want to grow in my understanding, and they say, you know what, I'm going to read the whole Bible in a year. Will you? Out of 10, how likely are you, do you reckon, to read the whole Bible in a year? And they say, I don't know, maybe a 6. And you say something like, in my experience, a 6 probably isn't really going to happen. What would we need to revise that to get it up to like an 8? Or maybe if I agreed, I could read the whole New Testament in a year. Well, that sounds like a good place to start. Do you think that would be an 8? Yeah, that's an 8. You see, if we actually ask people to scale their level of ownership, suddenly they are hearing themselves say, I'm really committed to that. And in church life, we are often trying to convince people to be committed to something they don't really want to be committed to. So if we want to start discipling people, we better find out what they are committed to. Mastery. Mastery is this idea that there's a couple of things. One is that I get to grow and learn, get better at something. For me, it came in a couple of funny ways. One was that my coaches in the weight loss coaching work, every day you had to send your food journal with your weight and the number of steps you'd walked into a Facebook group. And the coaches would encourage me, and I would be so grumpy, and I would complain, and I'd say things like, stop posting photos of people who've lost all this weight, I'm not losing any weight, it's not working. And they would say things like, well, will you keep it up for one more week? Okay, I'll do one more week. And then I'd complain and moan. They're like, oh, will you do the 10 weeks that you said, Aaron? Oh, I'll do the 10 weeks. And then I got this funny message one day. They said, we like you. You complain, but you don't quit. You see, I was learning the diet. I was lousy at it at the beginning. I didn't follow instructions. I heard the vague idea of it and just gave it my best approximation. It wasn't until I actually said, okay, what do you say I need to do? This. Okay. As soon as I started doing it to the letter, the weight started falling off me. But here was the real moment of mastery. When I stood on the scales at home, because you had to weigh yourself every morning, and the number had fallen, and I had this thought, didn't consciously seek to have the thought, it just came. This was the thought. I did that. I did that. That isn't a mistake. That isn't a fluke. I did that. My choices led to that. And when we are wanting to disciple people, we need to strengthen their expectation that their choices today can lead to a consequence tomorrow. And we might want to do that through something like getting them to talk about their future self. What does future you hope you're going to do? Because that's a great way of starting to think about, hey, are my choices today leading to the consequences tomorrow? That's what stops me eating the brownie tonight. Future me doesn't want me to eat the brownie. Present me would love some brownie. But future me would be grateful if I didn't. Because future me has to live with the consequences of my choices. Third thing, purpose. And this is really helpful in a kind of a gospel sense. Purpose says other people are counting on me to make this change. And I think that has been a great problem in the Christian life, is that we've talked about discipleship in such individualistic sense that I'm on this almost self-actualization journey where I'm becoming more and more like Jesus. For what purpose? I don't know, just because it would be fun. It'd be fun to be more like Jesus. But purpose says, no, other people are counting on you. I developed this motto during the weight loss journey that said this: you can be fat or you can be old, but you probably can't be both. And I realized that other people were counting on me, and people I hadn't even met yet were counting on me. Because I knew men who were starting, because that was the thing, I looked around and I realized, how many men do I see in their 80s that were my size? None. They're all gone. So other people are counting on me. So we want to strengthen people's sense of this isn't just for you. And this has been the challenge of church life, is that too often the discipleship has been about perpetuating the church and its events rather than a wider vision of what it means to live the Christian life in a way that impacts and changes the world around us. As soon as this discipleship is connected to an outcome I really care about, so A good friend, for him, his discipleship journey is framed by watching his alcoholic, drug addict parents get saved at a Baptist Bible study when he was a kid, and watching his parents change from night and day and realizing, I remember what it was like when I was afraid at home and now I'm not, and it was Jesus is the reason. I didn't have to be afraid as a kid anymore. You see, that's purpose. This matters to somebody else. So when we're talking to other people, we want to check, do you have autonomy? Are you owning this, or is this something I would think you should be doing? Can we talk about mastery? Can we talk about what consequences and what choices need to be linked up together? And who else is going to benefit from this? Who will be glad you did this? For me, I've yet to meet some of the people who will be glad, like my grandchildren. They'll be glad that I did this. In counselling lingo, we talk about this as contracting. When I have a client, the first thing we do is talk about, what do you want out of this? And I might ask a question like this, which you can feel free to steal. And that is, if you're having a conversation with someone, you could say something like, how would you know that me and you hanging out together had been worthwhile? How would you know? What would be the signs that it had been worthwhile that you came to this Bible study? How would you know that it had been worthwhile that we worked together in some way? That it had been a success? See, contracting says, actually, I don't want to assume that you want what I want. That's the challenge in church life. We just assume we know best. We know what you need. That way. So here's the final kind of idea, and then we'll have some Q&A. It's the idea of seeing now, in a world that no longer needs us to be experts, what they need is a chauffeur, someone who knows the way. But the person who hops in the back of the limo, they call the shots. They say where we're going, right? We don't tell them. Now, we don't have to go where they want us to go. If they say, can you take me to the red light district, you might say, I don't drive that way. Right? But if they say, can you take me to the airport, you can say, I know the way and I know how to get there faster. So you're letting the person you're trying to disciple help set some of the agenda, because this is what strengthens their sense of ownership. After all, if I've asked you to help me grow in this area, I'm way more likely to do it and to work with you. But if you've set the agenda, then you'll probably need to keep calling me, texting me, bugging me, encouraging me, propping me up. And as soon as you stop, I'm going to stop. Because the motivation lives in you, not in me. See the point here is? The point is, discipleship happens when the person chooses. Jesus said, come, follow me. And he says to the young man, rich young ruler, he says, I've kept the law, what should I do? Go and sell all your possessions, give to the poor, come follow me. To the one who says, but my parents, they're old, let the dead bury the dead. Dude, own this. Follow me. You notice how Jesus isn't groveling? Jesus would be a lousy church leader. He wouldn't even bother texting people. Because he'd actually expect disciples to be in charge of their discipleship. Have you decided to follow? Then come, follow. If you haven't, fine, stay home. Now, we don't want to be that abrupt, but we do want to take the hint, right? That maybe if we could help people own their journey a bit more and find out, okay, so you don't want to grow in theological understanding. Fine, where do you want to grow? Where are you ready for change? And work in those spaces and then see where it takes you. So there you go. That's the spiel for the evening. And if you're trying to remember it, for those of us of a certain age, we can remember the insurance company AMP. So that's how I remember it. Autonomy, mastery, purpose, AMP. That's getting motivation from the outside into the inside. And that means when you stop bugging them, they keep going because they don't need you. They enjoy and appreciate you, but they don't need you the way they used to. So, thoughts, questions, reflections? Now it's your turn. Look, I'm a counsellor. I'm really good with silence, so don't test me. I can outweight you.
guess that by learning some of these things, you avoid the disappointments that are inevitable when, I remember a number of times I've travelled to pick someone up for church every Sunday morning for a better part of 18 months.
Yeah.
And then the week he didn't even get there.
Yeah.
However, the week after he did get there.
Good.
And then on, he was on his own. But yeah, so easy to have an expectation to I'll come and I'll sort it out for you and resolve it for you. But if they buy into it, that's the battle, isn't it? Getting them to buy into it.
Absolutely. And the challenge for you and I is that it feels good to help. Let's not pretend it doesn't feel good, but ultimately there comes a point, at the beginning, bring him every week. But how are we going to get to that place where this is now his decision, not mine? Yeah.
It's a teenage daughter.
Yeah.
So we're not nag and push or...
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Right. Well, see, this is the thing, is that you can get compliance, but you don't get discipleship.
That's true.
I'm sitting down on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside. And in the end, you don't get discipleship, you just get compliance. And this is where we revert back then as the discipling parent to say, then I must continue to grow now and show you a life under construction. And now to look for those windows of opportunity where they say, why do you do that, Mum? Oh, well, I used to think this, but now I think this, and because I've learnt that. Interesting. Right? You notice as soon as the window opens, some discipleship can occur. But teenagers are a beautiful example because they remind us that you cannot disciple someone against their will. What you have in church life is too often overly compliant adults. They're happy enough to come, they're happy enough to participate, but don't presume this equals discipleship. Now, here's a great question for each person in the room. I don't like this question. I've asked many pastors, and I asked myself this question one time, and I was sad about the answer. How many people today are actually your disciples? That if we went to them and said, are you Aaron's disciple? They'd say, yep. And I realised that in my church, truthfully, I could get maybe just over a handful. But then I only had to step back and say, but what's the difference between the handful and the rest? Night and day. Night and day. Because once, and I noticed with the 5 or 6 that were truly my disciples, there was some contracting had gone on. We'd actually talked about it. They'd actually said, you know what, you and me, we're going to walk together. I need to learn some stuff. You can help me. Let's do this. And those are the people who are deeply relationally connected and grew. How many people are actually your disciples? So we just presume too often. Oh, you're at the church. Of course you're being discipled. Of course you're... Hey, if you're a pastor, you know that the test of discipleship is to say something that the person doesn't like or doesn't agree with and then realise they didn't come next week. Oh, well, they weren't really letting me disciple them. Weren't they? But I tell you, those 5 or 6 people that I was thinking of, I could say almost anything to them. And this was their default setting. This was was that there was just a genuine belief in them that if I brought it up and I wanted to talk about it, it was worth thinking about. That Aaron loves me, wants the best for me, and he knows something. So how many actual disciples do you have? And when you realise the answer is, I don't really know if I've got any, well, that's a good place to start, isn't it? To say, well, okay, right. What if I could get 1 or 2? Jesus turned the cities and nations upside down with just 12. He didn't try very hard. He didn't grow a big church. But he knew that 12 real disciples were way better than the 120, way better than feeding the 5,000 were his 12. That's where the action was. And even among the 12, there was 3 who came and prayed with him, just 3. Well, it's a good model. If it worked for him, maybe you and I could take a hint. What else?
I want to ask about that, Aaron.
Yeah.
If I'm hearing you correctly, and I think I agree with you, one of the key places we fall down is we're not intentional about it. We just presume it.
Yeah.
Instead of clarifying it.
Yeah.
And you talked about thinking of that handful of people where you were like, these are the people I do disciple. examples of what that looks like? Because I'm thinking many of us are in small groups here. And maybe we've had some of those conversations. Maybe we need to have some of those conversations.
That's right.
And so,
well, the conversation isn't necessarily one conversation, but a series of moments where we realise that actually this person is demonstrating a kind of openness that other people are not demonstrating. So we start to explore with them. What are you hoping to get out of being part of this? Again, it's that earlier question. What would success look like? What are you wanting? And helping set the agenda together is really very helpful. But it's a series of these moments, but it's predicated on, which again is often presumed in a church environment, is relationship. We presume a level of trust, a level of relationship. And as a counsellor, I've had to learn this the hard way. I remember being a supervisor for a pastor who after 3 years finally told me her story of the bad stuff that had happened to her as a kid. And I said, why has it taken 3 years? She said, I didn't trust you until now. Like, it's mind-blowing. Like, you see me every month, you pay me to listen to your story, but you're still trying to work out if you trust me. So there has to be a commitment to a kind of relationship that goes deeper than using the church structure as the scaffold of relationship. And so it means, if we're in a home group, for example, saying, I want to cultivate a relationship that transcends the home group, so that even if you stop coming to the home group, I'm still discipling you. That's the problem, is we often use the scaffolding of the church to hold people together. It's a great place to bring people together, but it may not be enough to hold them together. It's relationship that holds them. To the point, let me ask you this. Would you form a relationship so deep with someone that if they left this church, you'd still disciple them? See, that's a good test, isn't it? Or do you have to be part of this community? You hear what I'm saying?
Aaron, do you mean left church, or left church for another church?
Well, if they left church, they wouldn't want to be discipled. But if they moved to a church down the road, but you were still their discipler, if it was a genuine discipleship relationship, there'd at least be some enduring link. Now we understand they would want to attach themselves in a new way to the new group. But you hear the challenge, what I'm saying. Is it the church, the external scaffolding that's holding this together, or is it something more deeply personal? Because as we get more personal with people, that's when they start opening up and allowing us to work on the things that would really count.
So as part of that relational scaffold strengthening, is that not dependent, but it helps when we are actually open with the person we're discipling?
Right.
So like a two-way thing, rather than we wait and expect them to share their life and we help them with their life. Right. That we give something of ourselves to them.
Awesome. Let me have one more slide then. Oh, can I put that slide up? Oh, I didn't. It's annoying. Maybe put it up in one of the other sessions. So, was there?
Yeah.
Does it go back? Which way am I pointing? Done. Broken it. I've gone so far that PowerPoint has died. There are some contracting questions that I clicked too fast because that's what I wanted to. There should be maybe a slide with some questions on it. I went too fast, did I? It's like, yeah, just before the show. Second to last slide. There we go. And this speaks to what Sally is talking about. That no two relationships need be cookie cutter identical. Again, this has been the problem of, or the challenge of our group-focused discipleship, is that we've not tended to create new discipleship experiences. We do it all the same way with the same people at the same time. So we ask questions like, well, what skills do I offer? Why me? That's a good question. This is what Sally's saying. Why me? Is it that I'm an expert? Is it that I'm a friend? Is it that I'm someone who cares about you? Is it that I'm the only person who pays any attention to you? What is it? What do I have that you need? What are your goals? Where are you wanting to take this? See, now we're starting to form, these are the things we ask in that conversation. What kind of approach do you want from me? Do you want me to sit and listen mostly? Do you want me to teach mostly? Do you want me to model things and show you how to do certain things? What sort of approach do you want? You've got to make sure that that's an approach you could offer. Right? Well, that's what is success. You'll see that's a question I'm wanting people to drill down into, because if we can't agree on what success looks like, we won't know when we get there. And we won't be able to find the way there. And this has been the challenge, that discipleship ends up being such a airy-fairy, aloof idea. Like, what does it even mean? How would I know if I was one? Let's quantify, let's specify. Oh, that you'd be actively working in the community with this particular group of people. And that's how we'd know you were a disciple. You'd be helping in this way. You'd be doing this thing. Your family would be like this. Your personal life would be like this. What are we looking for? What level and type of contact do we want to have? That's a good one in church, isn't it? Some people want an awful lot of contact, don't they? Extra grace required. You didn't hear me call them a black hole, but some people have been known to call them things like that. That's unhelpful. But wouldn't it be good to agree, you know what, I can't call you every day, but I'd be happy to check in once a week and see how you're doing. All right? Form some agreement. And talk about what obstacles are we going to encounter. So we don't talk about that often enough, do we? What's going to get in the way of this working? And now we're talking about the real stuff. So this is the stuff that requires a real relationship, because people won't answer these questions if you're just the church-appointed person to you. They don't know you, you don't really know them. We really have to make sure we're cultivating relationship. Right, any other questions? Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Well, I've been thinking, as you've been speaking, this has nothing to do with the church. I belong to an art group. I've experienced over the years as an artist, and in the beginning, I used to give classes in painting.
Right.
And I would show them different things each week, and they would dutifully sit down and write it in notebooks. And then after the 4-week session or whatever, they go on painting, and they didn't remember any of it because it was just,
Right.
you say, it's just information.
Yeah.
So as experience went, I changed my method, and now I give people sort of a start, and then I say, start painting.
Right.
And if you get stuck and you don't know what to do, come and ask me. And that worked. I would say, well, your painting is unbalanced. You've got to put something on the right side.
Right.
Or the colors just don't match. If you change this color and that color.
Yeah.
And so they're learning by doing, and I'm there to help them when they get stuck. And they really learn what I teach them then, because that's what they want.
Yeah. Wonderful. What a great story. See, what skills do I have? What approach should I use? And how do we actually get to the goal? So the goal isn't me dumping my knowledge on you. The goal is you learning to paint and being happy with what you've painted. Right?
Yeah, and then they come to you for help when they're stuck.
Right.
And then they really learn.
And if we would apply that idea to discipleship, of course, now we realize how incredibly messy it is. Because if your art isn't very good, well, you're okay with that. But if your marriage is falling apart, well, that's a different kind of mess to have to share with someone. Yeah. And then we realize that we're going to need to really be deeply into the lives of the people we're discipling. Because if it isn't art, if it's actually a messy marriage that needs some work, boy, it might have been good to have started off at home group, but boy, you're going to need to have some serious time with that person to get down to business. Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you.
What about purpose? Can you just talk a little more about purpose? Is that the sort of thing that people have to discover for themselves, or how do you need people to search for purpose?
Yeah, it's a good question. This purpose thing, again, is not a one-size-fits-all. Again, in the church, we've often defaulted to that being the purpose. But truthfully, honestly, not every Christian really cares about people getting saved. They're really not that interested. Not all. Some are. I am. I'm an evangelist. I'm really interested in it. But I know plenty of people who aren't. My cousin Dave, who's my best friend, his purpose is all about stooping down as low as he can to serve the poor. And you find him working among the poorest of people. Life makes sense, when he's working among the poor. It isn't a one-size-fits-all, so it is, again, an exploration. Because if it's our purpose imposed, that's external. But if it's their purpose illuminated, that feels like life. Remember the famous Eric Liddell quote? Remember Eric Liddell, the Chariots of Fire guy? The runner? Remember his quote? When I run, I feel God's pleasure. That's purpose. What are you doing when you feel God's pleasure? For me, it's taken me a little while to work it out. For me, there's two kinds of purpose that I've really identified. One is that, for me, encountering truth, helping others encounter truth, feels wonderful. Like if you'll go away tonight and someone says, what was it like? And he'd say, oh, man, Aaron really opened my eyes to some stuff tonight. I'm really thinking about some stuff differently. Purpose. But let me give you the best kind of purpose for me. I've been a radio announcer. That's a kind of cool job. Did 25 years on air. I've been a pastor. Now a counsellor and a chaplain. And if you asked, why do I do that? How about this for purpose? Because I like me most when I do that kind of work. I like me most. Yeah, I like Aaron, the performer, the radio announcer, but I really like Aaron, the counsellor. That feels like me. When another human being feels loved, cared for, heard, and helped, that feels like me. Is that your answer? No, maybe not. So you and I need to have an answer, because the person's going to ask you, what's your purpose? Can't take them where you haven't gone yourself. It's challenging stuff, isn't it? Is this helpful? Anything else?
I think we as a church need to do a lot of learning so that we are able to answer the questions that people will often pose to us as we try and share our experience with them. Yeah. There's just so much to learn, I believe. Yeah. As I was talking to you earlier, how sort of through my life it has been a learning curve, and it's getting steeper. I still feel there's just so much more to learn if I'm going to be effective in sharing the gospel.
And so now we need to uncover the questions in the heart of the person we're trying to disciple. Again, we have our vision about their life and what it means to be a Christian, but what are they in this for? What are they needing? What are they wanting? I'm not saying it's the whole story, it's just a place to start. Because once we're working together, that's when at some future point you get to say, hey, look, I know we've been working on this part of your story for a while, but I can't help but think that we probably should give some attention to that. What do you think? Right? Well, if you've been walking with someone on their terms, they're much more likely to say, you know what, I think you might have a point. Right? And then we can start leveraging some other stuff. So let's finish tonight, though, where we started. You, the disciple. How deeply do you own your discipleship? I have no doubt that you own deeply your sense of responsibility and influence as a leader and a member of the church, and I know that those things are intersecting with each other. But if we could just put them aside for a second, the what you do part, and just focus on the who you are part. I want you to reflect on your discipleship right now, and to realise that the beginning of discipling others is a fresh commitment to being a disciple. Is the realisation that I cannot take people on a journey I'm not going on. And I asked you, who are your disciples? And let me ask you this as we finish. Who disciples you? Who genuinely is taking you on the journey? And if you don't have someone come to mind, it's time to start working on that, so that you and I are disciples too, modelling life under construction, but not just for the sake of constructing it, but because other people are going to count on it. So I'm wondering, you guys know each other, and I'd love just for us to spend some time praying together just as we finish. Asking God to really help us in this journey. And maybe for you it is time to, to come to terms with the fact that actually I'm not really actively engaged in my own discipleship. Or maybe you're thinking tonight, man, I realise I've just been kind of missing it with some of the people I'm working with, and I want to change my approach. I mean, there are so many things we've talked about tonight. I wouldn't dare to presume to know what's going on inside of your heart and mind right now, but I'd love for us to pray together and believe that the ingredient that we haven't spoken of enough tonight, but we know is present, is the Spirit of God himself, the great discipler at work in us and through us. He is doing the ultimate shaping, the ultimate transforming. But you and I have this role, right? We have this blessing, this privilege to walk with people. So why don't we break into groups of 2 or 3, just where you're seated and ask the person, tonight, what's challenged you tonight, and start to pray with each other around that area of challenge, that we might be personally challenged and challenged as disciples. Let's pray first of all, just together, and then break into groups. Father, we thank you that you have been listening in on our conversation tonight. God, I thank you for each one in this room and those who couldn't make it tonight, who are part of the heartbeat of St. Andrew's and a desire to see people not just come to church, but to be disciples. And Jesus, I know that you are challenging me and many others in this space right now about the extent to which we are still on the journey of discipleship, knowing that nobody has fully arrived. Nobody has finished that lifelong work. So challenge us tonight, Lord. Who is it really that is in a discipleship relationship with us? Who is it really that we are looking to continue to grow and develop as a disciple? What is the issue that you want to put your finger on in our lives, that we might be as concerned about our own growth as we are about the growth of others? And how is it, Lord, that we might begin to work with people in a way that helps them own this discipleship journey more deeply, that they might say, I have decided to follow Jesus, no turning back, no turning back. And that we might look back over our lives and see that there are those who've decided to follow Jesus, and that we got to be part of that and help them grow. So bless, Lord, these here and the teams they represent. May your Spirit be working in them and anointing and empowering, Lord, our lives to help create an environment where people flourish and grow, that we might be a witness to this community and to our world. In Jesus' name, amen.